YouTube family, let's talk. The Department of Education has been in the news a lot lately. It has come under fire from the current administration and the newly appointed Secretary of Education and former WWE promoter, Linda McMahon. Now, as of Wednesday, March 12th, 2025, approximately half of the hardworking employees at the Department of Education were laid off. So in today's video, we're exploring why the Department of Education was created, what it is, what they do, why it's important, and why dismantling the Department of Education will be devastating for children, families, and educators. Let's start with a little history. The Department of Education was established by Congress on October 17, 1979. It began operating on March 4th, 1980. Now, quick side note, because I know someone is thinking,
But public education was here before the Department of Education.
Yes, I think we can acknowledge public education existed long before 1979. In fact, the concept of publicly funded education dates back to over 200 years in the United States, but not necessarily for everyone, especially my and many of your ancestors who weren't even allowed to read due to anti-literacy laws. Yes, it was illegal to educate enslaved African Americans, especially in southern states, out of fear that literacy would lead to rebellion and resistance. Now, we'll touch on similar themes later, but for now, let's get back on track. So why was the Department of Education established? Here's the short answer: to provide federal assistance to schools at the local level by ensuring equal access to education and coordinating federal education policies. But why was this important? Well, prior to becoming a cabinet-level department, education at the federal level was primarily handled by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, which was established in 1953. Now, the creation of the Department of Education was driven by a number of important factors, including increasing the federal government's role in education, especially when it came to educational policy and funding after the National Defense Education Act of 1958 that gave increased aid and funding for science education, but on a smaller scale, and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965, which was the first large infusion of federal funding into the schools and classrooms. Now, the second factor, political pressure and strong advocacy from the National Education Association, or NEA, which is the largest teachers union in the United States. Now, what were they advocating for? They were advocating for a separate department to give education much greater visibility and priority in federal government. Quick side note and FYI for my school psychologists in training and other educators: your local, state, and federal teachers unions are for all educators, not just pre-K through 12 teachers. For example, being a school psychologist, speech language pathologist, or occupational therapist does not mean you can't sit at the cool kids table. You can. In fact, you're encouraged to do so. And I encourage educators to get active in your union so you can better advocate for your students, for families, communities, other educators, and definitely for yourself. All right, let's get back to the factors that drove the creation of the Department of Education. Here's a third factor. It was an effort to streamline and centralize education programs that prior to the establishment of the Department of Education were scattered across multiple federal agencies, which created inefficiencies and lack of coordination. And lastly, the creation of the Department of Education was driven by increasing recognition that education policy needed focused attention at the highest levels of government as education became more central to social mobility and economic competitiveness. Prioritization of education has a higher return of investment than almost anything else. Unfortunately, this is known and feared by some people because an educated population is a lot more difficult to deceive and manipulate. Now, I know somebody's thinking about this next question. What about when the Department of Education was established in 1980? What became its mission then? That's a great question. When the Department of Education was established, its mission was to promote student achievement and preparation for global competitiveness, foster educational excellence, ensure equal access to educational opportunity. More specifically, it aimed to, and I want you to listen very closely to what I'm about to say, okay? Lean in a little bit. Come here. The Department of Education aimed to support and complement state and local efforts to improve education quality. Let me say this again. The Department of Education aimed to support and complement state and local efforts to improve education quality. Okay? Yes, the Department of Education was designed to act as a partner to states and local communities rather than dictating curricula or policies. Now, the Department of Education also aimed to strengthen federal commitment to equal educational opportunities for all and prohibit discrimination and increase accountability. Also, promote improvements in education through federally supported research and sharing of information, and also enhance coordination and management of federal education programs. Last but not least, focus national attention on key educational issues and encourage public, parental, and student involvement in federal education programs. But what about now? It's 2025. So what does the Department of Education do? Let's start here. Supporting state and local efforts. And trust me, there's a very big reason why I'll continue hammering this point home. Because while education is primarily state and locally run, the department offers funding, guidance, and oversight to help states meet their educational goals. Again, the Department of Education, it does not dictate your child's curricula or override your local and state policies. Equal access to education. For starters, the Department of Education ensures all students, regardless of socioeconomic status or background, race, gender, or disability, have access to quality education through programs like Title I, which provides aid for underfunded and disadvantaged schools, and IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is responsible for special education and the enforcement of special education policies and law. IDEA is also an acronym that any current or prospective Secretary of Education should know. Enforcing civil rights. Let's continue along this theme of equal access to education. You see, the Department of Education also protects against discrimination in schools, colleges, and universities, ensuring compliance with laws like Title IX. Hey, here's something a lot of you know about: federal student aid. Guess what else the Department of Education does? It also administers student loan programs like direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans and grants like Pell Grants and the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grants, helping millions afford college primarily through the Office of Federal Student Aid. And last but not least, the Department of Education also provides vital statistics and research to improve education policies and practices nationwide. Let's discuss the elephant in the room. Why will dismantling the Department of Education be catastrophic for children, families, and educators? The first reason, loss of funding. Many schools rely on federal funding, especially low-income communities and families. So eliminating the Department of Education could leave these schools without crucial resources. Now, the next question is, what can happen when there's a lack of crucial resources? Teacher layoffs, which contributes to higher teacher-to-student ratios, less academic intervention, and academic and teaching programs for students, such as tutoring, as well as a lack of access to behavioral and mental health services. So a loss of federal funding will significantly impact the quality of education for many of our students. So what are some of the other consequences of dismantling the Department of Education? Inequities would widen. The absence of a unifying body could lead to fragmented policies with no consistent framework for addressing nationwide challenges like literacy rates or graduation rates. And without federal oversights, states might differ and diverge significantly in terms of quality of education. Fragmented policies may mean your child with an IEP may no longer be eligible for special education and/or related services if you were to move and relocate to another state. Okay? Let's transition to the next consequence. Impact on special education. Programs like IDEA, which protects the rights of students with disabilities, might lose funding or enforcement. A major part of special education is students with significant special needs having access to services and educators with specific training and skills to support them. A lack of funding may lead to, again, special education programs getting cut and students and parents no longer having access to protections such as due process when there is a complaint. Higher education costs. Federal student aid programs could disappear, making college inaccessible for millions. Now let's pause right here. I want to pause right here because so far we've covered a lot of ground. We discussed the creation and purpose of the Department of Education, as well as the role and function of the Department of Education and the implications of dismantling it. But there's a few more points I want to cover. Now, just in case it's not clear, I repeat, I am not for the dismantling of the Department of Education, which would remove many students' access to a quality education, in addition to removing many of the protections our students have, especially our infants, toddlers, children, and teenagers with disabilities. Cuts to the Department of Education will not be nearly enough to eliminate bureaucratic bloat, and privatization of a public service like education brings a whole host of other issues. If you remove regulations and oversight, then sooner or later, we'll have to put back the regulations. Why? Because there's a very good chance that privatizing public education takes the primary focus away from teaching students, increasing accountability, and providing protections, and shifts the focus to a mainstay of privatization: making money. Also, in my 18 years as a school psychologist, I had a number of positions where I've seen and experienced a lot. From the trenches in the schools and classrooms to the central offices that drive policy at the local levels to collaborating with elected officials at the state level. And here's one thing I can tell you. People, they don't play about their money. We already know that. People also don't play about their children. And few people can make more noise than angry parents and fed up educators advocating for the rights of their children. Now, when the two come together, now you might be wondering, is it lawful to dismantle the Department of Education with an executive order? No, it isn't. It has to go through Congress. So as of March 18th, multiple lawsuits have been filed. 21 attorneys general are suing to block the current administration from dismantling the Department of Education. Now, this, like many other unlawful actions taken by this administration, will go through the courts. Hopefully the courts do their job. But we can't sit back and rely solely on Congress and the courts. So what can you do to speak up and fight back? Parents and educators, go to your Board of Education meetings and ask how dismantling the Department of Education will affect students and funding in your school district. Attend local and state rallies, including walk-ins. Attend town hall meetings with your lawmakers and your House representative and your senator. Be vocal, speak up. You can also call them and/or write them, and stay up to date by arming yourselves with information from credible sources. Listen here, man. Education doesn't solely occur in the classroom. A critical element of educating oneself is asking the right questions and knowing how to conduct research to find the right information. So when people say things like, "Why should I trust you?" I say some iteration of, "You don't have to, and I can't make you." But the onus and responsibility is on you to do your own research. Just make sure it's coming from credible sources and put on your critical thinking cap. Or don't, because it's also your right to remain stupid. YouTube family, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I had a few other videos lined up, but I wanted to get this out ASAP because it's important and it's time. I'll leave you with some informative links in the description down below. Now, don't forget to leave a like and comment, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And last but not least, share this video with any and everyone who values our children and prioritizes education. I don't care if they're Democrat, Republican, Independent, Autobot, Decepticon, G.I. Joe, Cobra. Shout out to my 80s babies. Share this video. And until next time, you already know what it is, man. Make sure you take care of yourselves and one another. Peace.